There you go.
Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Denisha Rajendran, and I'm moderating the fourth Google Hangout session of the 5th International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through the Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 14 award-winning best-selling women writers to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts and violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project alive, as well as to reveal the first mystery celebrity male role model portrait in our Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later on in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting our website, www.thepixelproject.net. We have a very, very special guest with us today for our live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the fabulous fantasy author, Alma Alexander. Alma's life so far has prepared her very well for her chosen career. She was born in a country which no longer exists on the maps, has lived and worked in 7 countries on 4 continents and in cyberspace, has climbed mountains, dived in coral reefs, flown small planes, swum with dolphins, touched 2,000-year-old tiles in a gate out of Babylon. She's a novelist, anthologist, and short story writer who currently shares her life between the Pacific Northwest of the USA, where she lives with her husband and 2 cats, and the wonderful fantasy worlds of her own imagination. Alma has also very generously donated some really lovely and exclusive treats to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. The first treat is an Ever After chapbook edition, signed and personalized for US donors only. This is a 4-part story collection of 4 stories entitled Ever After. The chapbook edition is one of a kind because Alma will print and bind it herself for you, and it is usually only available as an ebook. The second treat is also for US donors, is a One Midnight at Spanish Gardens paperback edition, signed and personalized, and a selection of bookmarks. As for donors worldwide, we will get an Ever After ebook edition. Alma has generously made available 2 copies of this ebook for donors across the world, perfect for smaller donors and donors who live outside of the US. And the fourth treat is a 30-minute one-on-one Skype chat with Alma herself. She's offering a 30-minute Skype chat for one generous donor, during which you can chat about anything from writing to books to life with her. This perk is open to individuals and groups such as library groups, writing groups, book clubs worldwide. If you'd like to get any of these as a reward for donating to us, better hurry up because there are only limited number of these goodies. Once someone snaps them up, it's all gone. So please give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. So far, we have raised $1,220 towards our $5,000 goal. So to help us get past the first $1,000 mark by donating to get Alma's goodies. And if you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Alma questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type out your questions in the chat box on the right of the YouTube screen. And Anusha, who will be our producer, she is also the chat box moderator. She will relay the messages to me and I'll read them out to Alma for her to answer. And now over to Alma. She'll be reading an excerpt from her book, Trigger Warning for Sexual Assault. So there may be viewers who would be affected by this. So if you may go get a cup of coffee, get a cup of tea for about 10 to 15 minutes, excuse yourself for a while, and then you can come back in and we will start with our interview session with Alma. Alma, over to you for a reading.
Okay, hi everybody, good to see you. I hope everybody's out there listening away. I've decided to read from this thing, which is what I call my blessed book. It was 200,000 plus words written at white heat in less than 4 months. It was more or less dictated to me rather than me having written it at all. And the girls in this book who are part of a sisterhood of Jin-Shei, which this whole thing is based on a women's secret language in China, which is real, which is true, called Nushu, which has only been taught from mother to daughter over the ages, and it's now a dying, or rather a dead language, because the last person who has been taught it by her own mother like this is now dead at age 80 something. She's an old lady. So when I found out about that, I started writing this story, and the basic thing about the Jin-Shei bond is that you become chosen sisters. You become sisters of the heart. It's a family that you choose and not the family of your blood. And anything that you get asked in terms of to do for somebody who is your Jin-Shei sister, you have to at least try to do. And one of the characters in this book is Nia, who is she's a very wise person, and she's an extremely special woman. But she was born with a clubfoot, and she's a cripple in her world, and in a lot of ways she is in some ways unmarriageable, because nobody wants to marry a girl who can't work in that kind of context. So she is a wonderful human being, but she's always felt hobbled. She's always felt like she's been, not really living up to her potential. So when she meets up with somebody at court who is a mage at court and who treats her in a very different way, she really has no real defense against this, especially when he makes her promises he can't possibly keep. So I'm going to read a bit of that. What a strange dream I had. Nia, eyes still closed, was dimly aware of lying on a soft surface, a bed, but when she tried to turn and stretch and burrow back into sleep, she found herself unable to move. Her arms were stretched loosely above her head, but when she tried to bring them down to pillow her face, she realized that her wrists were tied together with something soft but strong, which also anchored her arms to a solid and unyielding point behind and above her. This was no dream. Nia's eyes flew open as memory flooded in. She was in Li Huai's room, but this was a very different place to the one she had entered. How long was it? Minutes, hours, days ago? Most of the concealing screens had been removed. A cluttered L-shaped desk and a laboratory bench took up one whole corner next to one of the fireplaces. Half of it bore an eclectic mixture of laboratory equipment, distillation apparatus, alembics, assorted glassware with strangely colored liquids inside, a mortar and pestle, and a small crucible with an open flame above which, as Nia watched, something in a long-necked glass flask bubbled quietly. The other half was piled with books and manuscripts, an inkwell, a quiver full of writing quills and brushes, a roll of parchment prepared for writing and held down by several paperweights which looked like human skulls. Another skull, fitted with an iron band which hinged at the jaw, sat on a small three-legged stool beside the table, set upside down in its crown in a carved ebony base, its jaw lid open. The sage Li Huai, dressed in a dark-shaped robe, fastened with a clasp on one shoulder, turned from his workbench as Nia watched, bearing a pewter bowl in his hands. He glanced over at her, realized she was awake, gave her a half-smile and a courtly bow, and then crossed to the skull and carefully poured the contents of his bowl inside, closing the jaw on top of it as he did so. Then he picked up the skull in both hands, swirled it slightly to mix whatever was in it, and crossed the room to the bed in which Nia was tied. "Awake, my dear?" Li Huai said. "Good, then we can finally begin." Nia opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, not even a whisper. Li Huai saw the shock of that wash over her features and smiled, setting the skull down in a delicately lacquered chest of drawers that served as a bedside table. "Don't try to talk, Nia," he said gently. "You can't. I took your voice from now. You will not need it for a while. All you need to do is listen to me and do what I tell you to do. There is nothing wrong with your senses. In fact, they are stronger than they have ever been, and we will sharpen even that." He reached out, lifted her head and pillowed it on his arm, reached for the skull vessel with his other hand. "Drink, Nia. This will bring you to the edge of flight. This is a draught of immortality, waters from the fountains of Kahan." The words were lancing. She had thought he had spoken in metaphors before when he had mentioned the fountains, but now she had a clear sense that he spoke of a thing that was as real as solid as his gentle but inexorable touch. "Drink," he said firmly, lifting the edge of the skull against her lips. She felt liquid lap against her mouth, tried to turning her head away in feeble defiance, but Li Huai let her head fall back just a little, tightening the muscles in her neck. Nia gasped. Her lips parted, the liquid from the skull vessel flooded her mouth. She swallowed convulsively. Li Huai set her down very gently. "Good. It will take a few minutes. Just relax." Colors swirled in her vision as she lay back against the pillow, and then she rose above them, through them, every edge in the room suddenly diamond-edged, sharp enough to cut. She heard rustles of small living creatures in distant dark corners of the room, saw the warp and weft of the weave in the canopy of the silk stretched above the bed she lay in, felt the smoothness of silk caress her body. She was aware suddenly that she was not wearing her own clothes, but a pale robe, twin to the one Li Huai was garbed in, fastened at the shoulder with a metal clasp. The taste in her mouth was metallic, an unholy mixture of terror, raw panic, and the chemical soup that had been in her skull potion. The very air rang in her ears, every nerve ending in her body quivering with sensation. Li Huai glanced at her, seemed satisfied with what he saw, nodded. Nia heard him start murmuring something in a voice she hardly recognized, in a language she did not know, his back to her now, his arms raised as if in invocation, his long dark hair lifting and quivering at the ends as though in response to some unfelt breeze. His voice rose to a crescendo of power. Nia heard herself screaming, but she knew that she made no sound in the firelit room. Li Huai touched the clasp that held his robe. It fell open, and he discarded it, leaving it in a crumpled heap of silk on the floor as he turned and strode back towards the bed. He was nude, his lithe, muscular body painted by light and shadow from the fire, his hair caressing his naked shoulders, his eyes aglow of triumph. "It was good," he said conversationally in his normal voice, "that you were physically marked. A beauty of flesh coupled with that beauty of spirit, and you would have been any man's prize. But with this—" His hand came down lightly on Nia's withered leg, his fingers caressing the length of it until they reached the twisted foot. "It took a sage and a sorcerer to see the inner beauty, and you have remained pure for me." Nia whimpered, soundlessly closing her eyes. "You will feel," Li Huai said, leaning over to whisper in her ear. You will give everything." She felt him touch the clasp of her own robe, and the fabric slipped free. Li Huai swept it from her in a single motion, leaving her lying naked and exposed in the silken sheets. Then his hands came to rest on her shoulders, still gentle, but still frighteningly kind. "And you are a beauty, after all," he breathed, his thumb slipping from her collarbone to sweep over her breast. His touch was fire. Nia writhed, turning her head away. More to come," Li Huai said. "Don't use it all up now. I want it all. You have known no man before me, I think. Good. The essence is made stronger. The first time then for the body, the rest for the spirit. Feel it, Nia. Feel it all." His hand slipped further down, caressing her breast, her waist, coming to rest on her hips. She felt the bed shudder, then her legs being pushed apart by his knees as his hands came down, further down, fingertips of feather-like touch on her thighs, as far down on her knees and then back up on the inside of her thigh, gently, so gently. "It may hurt a little," he said, almost apologetically, as his hands came together and brushed up and down between her legs. Nia's body arched, twisted, but there was no escape from his touch, from his gentle voice, from his presence. She would not open her eyes, keeping them tightly closed, squeezing out hot tears between eyelids pressed together. She would not look, she would not give him even that much. But he was right in that he was taking everything. Her traitor's body, with its preternaturally aroused senses, writhed in both anguish and vivid shocks of pleasure that were hateful to her, but which she could not barricade her mind against as he opened her with his long fingers, and then, his hip bones hard against her own, he entered her with a grinding thrust and a groan of his own pleasure. Nia's hands were clenched into tight fists, her arms straining from her shoulders, her breath catching in painful sobs as rending pain jackknapped her body under Li Huai's in the bed. And then it was over. He was lying on top of her, supported on his elbows, a hand pushing Nia's hair away from her face, his voice a miracle of softness and wonder, whispering beside her ear. "And now," he said, impossibly the meaning of his words, a searing agony that made Nia's eyes fly open, and yet more anguish, only to meet the quiet triumph in his eyes. "We begin." He pulled out of her and sat up, murmuring more invocations. "What more do you want?" Nia screamed at him in her mind, still only in her mind. Incredibly, he answered her there. "Your body is only a gateway to your soul, my dear. For the rest, we will have to go back to that place where you fly free. But never forget that I hold the power to bring you down. You die at my word, Nia. Don't forget that." She felt him inside her then, not inside her body, a greater violation still, inside her heart and mind and spirit of her. He laid his gentle hand on it all, and it was a touch of iron. Fly, he commanded. And oh, she did. It was back in the sky that it terrified and exalted her, so that first time she had experienced it, and this time it was even greater and bluer and more wonderful than she remembered, and beyond that blue there were stars. She could see them glittering, count them in their multitudes, her eagle's wings spreading to catch the wind as she climbed up towards them. Yes, she heard in her mind an exultant shout, not her own. Yes! She opened her eyes then at last and looked. She saw a creature of fire rearing over her, his eyes glowing embers of burning red coals. His hair flames above his face. She saw a spirit that had been old when the world was young, its centuries heavy on it, needing sustenance to survive, to endure. She saw the thing that had bound her to this monster, a thread of light, streaming into his open mouth. It was drinking her, all of her, taking the essence of a pure spirit and filling up the fiery vessel that was himself, glowing ever brighter as it drained her, sucked her dry. Even as it came, the vision blurred and faded. Nia's eagle's self became a ghostly echo and slowly faded from the sky full of stars, or they faded from around her, growing distant and pale and insubstantial. In the earthly anchor of her body, she saw Li Huai poised over her, his head thrown back, his eyes closed, his hands on her shoulders, and then even that vanished slowly from the outer edges in, as the potion in the skull seemed to lose effect, and the cutting edges of things blurred back into just distant, fuzzy outlines, and then dimmed into a uniform grayness which deepened into black. And then she knew no more.
Wow, that was a very powerful chapter.
That was a hard thing to write. That was a hard thing to write because it was not even just simple physical rape. This was something that went way beyond that. This was a psychological, spiritual devouring, and the worst of it was that the man who did it was so kind.
Yeah, so like with these sort of things, I mean, we see this particular book with the Secrets of Jin-Shei. It features plenty of fantastic female protagonists. I think there's like as many as 8 characters, who are very human and very flawed, with various personalities, and then you see the patriarchy, which takes a multitude of forms. So, and Chinese culture is one of the most patriarchal of all. So why did you decide to base the Secrets of Jin-Shei on some of these aspects
that language thing. Well, believe it or not, when I started writing this book, I had nothing except a vague outline of 9 characters who sat there, nameless, quite formless, but very, very strong. And I didn't know who they were or where they were or what they were supposed to be up to until I saw that article. Somebody actually sent me an article about Nushu and that last woman who was dying, and all these characters that sat up and sort of went, well, that would be us. And that's where that's where the story went. It became based in Imperial China at that point, and I did change it quite dramatically because you're right, it's very patriarchal, and the people who read this book as without the fantastical overlay, reading it as a historical novel, keep on saying, well, this isn't what it works. This isn't how it works, because this is not the real China. Well, it isn't. My China is very, very, very matriarchal in this kind of sense. This is the power behind everything. In this particular fantasy country, there is an emperor who rules, yes, but the emperor is chosen by the empress who is the heir, and she marries the man who is the emperor. It's not the man who is the emperor, it's the empress who is the one through whom the dynasty works.
Yes.
So the whole thing is very woman-centric. This is it's actually been described by reviewers as feminist fantasy, whatever that is. So I write feminist fantasy. What can I say? But the thing is, this particular book, with the characters who get connected through these links of Jin-Shei, I mean, they literally range from the little seamstress who just happens to fall into it because she meets the young empress before the young empress gets killed in an earthquake, and then tells her, take care of my sister, who is now the heiress. And then these two very unlikely people come together, and the rest of them kind of accrete along the way. And they were very, very, very different but very special women who all have a very distinct part to play in this. even though they don't necessarily, on the face of it, feel like they all belong in the same story, but they do. There are little threads and little tentacles of each woman's story, each of the other stories, and they're all connected through this massive promise of Jin-Shei that they have to deal with, that they have to do. And it all comes apart when the Empress decides that she's going to break the system and she's not going to choose an emperor. She's going to be the Empress. She's going to rule. And she tells one of her sisters that what she wants from her, she's the alchemist, what she wants from her is immortality. Go and find a way to make me live forever. And the whole world breaks on that. And I actually wrote a second book in that context, in that world, but it takes place 400 years after the events of this one. Mm-hmm. And the second book was Embers of Heaven, and it's actually it's rooted in the Cultural Revolution in China, which I found out the hard way why people don't write fantasy based in that Cultural Revolution part of China, because the stuff that you read and when you're researching it, it's hard to believe that it's actually real, that you aren't reading something that somebody else hasn't already made up about it, because it's so bigger than you can believe. All the things that were going on, it's unbelievable how evil humans can be to humans.
No, that's true. That is true.
And when you come up with something like that, you sort of put that into another fantasy element. One of the characters in that other book is based on somebody who people will probably recognize if they looked at it, because I researched a lot of lives. And the challenge of making somebody who has always been perceived as the most ultimate villain in the world into somebody who is human and with whom you can see past the utter blackness into the shades of gray that are underneath. That was a challenge. Trying to do a character who you can not so much approve of, because you don't need to do that, but somebody you can understand why he did what he did. And you can say that he was wrong. You can say that there's all kinds of interesting ramifications from that. But some part of you can understand the reasoning behind the thing that was done. I mean, no villain ever wakes up in the morning and gets out of bed and sort of goes, let me see how bad I can be today. It's a question of they'll do things that we, the rest of humanity, might perceive as being thoroughly evil, but they'll do it because of their own reasons, and those reasons to them might feel defensible.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting trying to write gray characters. I don't do classic simple stuff. I don't do classic happy endings. I don't do dyed-in-the-wool villains and innocent maidens ready to be rescued. I write real people. Mm-hmm. And real people always have layers in them.
Yeah. One of the best things about the Secrets of Jin-Shei is your focus on female friendship. That sticks out first because female friendship isn't usually at the forefront of fantasy books. So what are the challenges of writing the various friendships in the stories, and why do you think positive takes on female friendship is still not very common in the genre?
I have a book somewhere up there on my shelves about the female stories of history that have remained untold. And it's the simple truth that history has been written from a specific point of view, and it's very much not the female point of view. You never really hear the stories of the women. You never really hear the reality of lives. When you think about history, you think, there was a battle at such and such a place, and this guy killed that guy, and everything went. This is how the world was changed. But under and below and all around that battle, there are the women. All these men who fight in there are somebody's sons, somebody's brothers, somebody's husbands, somebody's fathers. They all belong to families. And when they are gone, what is left for the women? And the people who write the histories don't go back and ask the women whose everyday lives are now completely and irrevocably changed, well, how is things different for you? And what are you going to have to do to cope with this new reality that you are now on your own because all your menfolk are bones in some distant battlefield? So you don't actually see or hear or learn about the histories of women. And in some ways, that is the bones of history. There was a thing that I just picked up the other day, and then somebody in an academic environment picked up a stick of wood, and it had like notches in it. And the lecturer said, well, this has been called the first calendar that was made by man. But she said, take a look at what is in here. There are 28 notches in here. What man would need to know when 28 days have passed? This is the woman's first calendar, not a man's. Because the women have a different view on life. They have a different, their lives are governed by different things. And they need to know the passage of time in a different context. And to me, the challenge of writing fiction, which sounds true, is to make it a history that simply hasn't been told yet. I keep on telling people that fantasy is the best way that you have of telling people the truth, because they can actually read it in a book and they can swallow it whole and not realize that they've learned something until they've actually learned it without, having it shoved down their throat and them resenting it every step of the way. And you want to tell somebody what it feels like to be a woman who is completely powerless, like I did in this scene. You can try going, you can talk to them until you're blue in the face, but they won't listen to you, because if it's your own personal experience and the truth, it's like, you're just making it up, you're exaggerating, what have you. But you write it in a story, they'll read the story, and for some reason that rings true. And people will understand that there's a guy who writes incredible fantasy books. He's a guy, quite literally, Guy Gabriel Kay. I don't know if you heard about him, if you read about him. He wrote a set of books they're called the Fionnuala Tapestry. And there is a particularly harrowing scene in that, which involves the assault of one of his characters by the dark god of his fantasy world. And it's it's hard to read. It's hard to live through. And I was at a convention where he was doing a reading of something quite different, a new book he was writing, and he finished reading it, and there was commentary and questions and what have you. And then this one man stood up from the audience and said, look, I just wanted to tell you something. And I mean, I know it's got nothing to do with what you're reading, and it's an older book, but I just feel like I need you to know this. My fiance was raped, and I did not understand. When she told me, I did not understand. I could not connect with it. And then I read your book, and I understood, and it made sense to me. And it finally made sense to me. And there wasn't a dry eye in that room. People were sobbing in the back room, because this was a story that made sense to somebody, to get somebody's experience, somebody's lived experience finally come alive in a crashing way. He said, I will never forgive you for making me feel that, but I had to do it. I had to go there. I had to understand in that kind of visceral way.
Yeah.
So, to me, that is the most powerful thing that fiction can do. It can wake up that power dream that makes everything feel 3 times as real, even though you're just reading a pack of lies.
Yeah.
I mean, I write for a living. It's quite a job, I'm
so,
actually
like all genre fiction, fantasy has its share of female stereotypes and tropes. So how do you break stereotypes in to create a female character with agency while dealing with the world around her, including situations which involve sexism, misogyny, and end violence against women and girls?
The thing about tropes is that that's exactly what they are, and that's all they are. But there's 2 different things here. There's a stereotype and there's the archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing the archetype, then you're using something that is fundamental and is huge and is extremely recognizable. And you're using that to convey, to portray something that may be smaller in the context of the story, but you can still connect with the archetype, like she is a superhero, or she is the mother, or she is the crone, but she deals with her own little corner of the world and her own little corner of the life, but you can connect her to that bigger things. If she's a stereotype, then she's going to be the rescued maiden who is screaming in the claws of the dragon, and there's nothing else there. She doesn't connect to anything. That is all that she is.
Yeah.
And that is the difference that is very, it's hard to skate off of, really. But when I write about characters, I don't write, men or women. I write people. And people, it's hard to be coherent about this, because I don't really write characters. They just come out of the woodwork and they tap me on the shoulder and say, here, I've got a story to tell you. And then I start taking dictation. But I write real people. And to me, people who respond to ways in which they have been wronged in this world, which a lot of women have been. In the light of the whole Me Too movement, it's incredible how many people were sat up and said, look, I understand this because something like it happened to me too.
Yes.
It's just something that you find something that is recognizable. And in order to cast a light in that shadow, you write it so that it feels real, it feels true. The only thing that drives away shadow is that light. And we have to talk about these things. It's important. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to listen to, but it's important.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, just as you say, it's important. Do you ever feel like you're pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make them likable or relatable? I mean, human beings, like you said, you write people and not characters. So do you feel like you get flack for not making the female character likable enough?
I get flack for making characters that are not likable enough, but that doesn't necessarily mean just women. I wrote a set of books called the Weir Chronicles, and the main character in one of those 3 books is a young adolescent male who is your classic whiner and piker, and he's basically, the world is against me, and there's nothing I can do, and oh my. And he is, at the beginning of that story, he's just sullen and rebellious, and everybody's against me, and I don't like anybody, and nobody likes me, and everybody can just go away, and just, I don't know. But he does grow out of it. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be likable every moment of every day of your entire life. You're a human being, and you're allowed to be a pest every now and again, because we all are.
I'm in full agreement.
I mean, nobody out there is a completely perfect angel that is just likable all the time. It's okay not to like people. It's okay not to like yourself every now and then. You're going to do something every so often that you're going to look back on, and you're going to say, how could I have possibly thought this was something that I could have thought was a good idea? I mean, it happens to everybody. It's part of growing up. It's the mistakes that you make that make you who you are.
Yeah.
The problem is that there are some people who learn from those mistakes, and there are some people who never do and never will and never can. And those are the people who, I suppose, you can count as being terminally unlikable, because they're just going to go and do their own thing, and they don't care what people think about them and what have you. They don't care who they hurt and what they do, just so in order to get what they really want in their own lives. But as a whole, everybody you meet, if you ask them to be honest with you, they have done one thing in their life that they regret somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can't hold that against people.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's true. There's a question from Anusha Kandasivam. Her question is a story feminist because it's a story about women? Does that mean stories about men are the default?
That's about 6 questions. Um, the story doesn't. If a story is about a child, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a children's story. We were talking about Ursula Le Guin earlier. You might know a story about of hers called "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas." Do you know that story?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically hinges on how there's this absolute paradise of a place, and everything is perfect, and everything is wonderful, and life is just great. But the whole thing depends on one thing, and that is that one child in this city has to live in a hole in the ground in a basement somewhere, deaf and blind, sitting in its own excrement, having nothing to eat and having no company. I mean, not living a terrifying existence. And it is that child who pays for all the sins. And because that child is there, and only because that child is there, and only so long as that child is there, the rest of this place is so wonderful. And she talks about the people who learn this, who know this, and then choose to ignore it or forget it and just carry on living their perfect lives. And then there are those who walk away from Omelas because they cannot handle the idea that their lives are paid for in this kind of way. Now, that story is at its core about that child who is living in that kind of environment. And yet it is not a children's story, just because there's a child in it. By the same token, a story about a woman is not necessarily defined as a feminist story. And a story about a man can be just as much of a feminist story if it's shown in the right angle and the man's attitudes and views in life as a story with a woman as a protagonist. I mean, when I married my husband, he's more of a feminist than I am. He's a very strong believer in the fact that women are everything that they need to be and that they can be, and he's always been right behind me, pushing me to be whatever to be the best me that I can be. But in his story, I mean, this is a feminist story. He's got a woman he loves who he's supporting to live her dream, right. And in that sense, that's a very feminist story, and yet it's about a man.
Yeah.
Did I begin to answer that?
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, you definitely did answer that. The next thing that we'd like to ask is that your books feature a wide range of male characters. Some are misogynists and others are respectful of women, their thoughts and their decisions, like you said, your husband. So likewise, male-female relationships in your books vary from oppressive to equitable. What do you want your readers to take away from this?
There are human beings in the world, and they are all very different, and some of them will treat you with respect no matter what you do, and some of them won't treat you with respect no matter what you do. And basically there's very little you can do about that except be who you are and stand up for your own system of beliefs and your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own mind, your own spirit, and they need to carry that respect from people that you meet. There are people who will cross your path. There's nothing you can do to make them like or respect you, simply because they will look at you and see nothing except, oh, that's a woman, and the woman's opinion is not important. But you can't change that. You are who you are that woman, and the only thing that you can do is be a better human being than they are, because that's the only thing that's left for you to do. You can't change anything else. There are people whose minds you will never change. There are people who climb into conversations on the internet with the express purpose of basically derailing the conversation so that it comes back to be about themselves, and it doesn't matter what the women are saying. And there's nothing you can do about that. You basically argue with such people fruitlessly because it'll never get anywhere. They just don't listen. They talk at you, not with you. They will just constantly, put their own point of view across, and nothing is going to get solved.
The line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books, whether it's epic fantasy, urban fantasy, or paranormal romance. Do you think this is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of writing about it. um,
Yeah.
you're right in the sense that it is a standard trope of the body strippers to basically say a woman will say no until she says yes, and you just have to persist until she does say yes. And I think that a lot of those books, those kinds of romances, have really fallen by the wayside because people have stopped believing that in one sense, or not so much stopped believing it, but stopped accepting it, perhaps. Um, there is one particular book that there's a writer who writes these historical romances. You might have heard the name MMK. She wrote The Far Pavilions, and she wrote Shadow of the Moon, and those books. I love those books. I love Shadow of the Moon. Is one of my comfort reads. I'll go back and reread that book when I feel like reading something that I know is good, and I will just go and lose myself in that thing. It's a beautiful book. It's full of beautiful characters, and it's just beautifully done. But she wrote this one book called Trade Wind, and that is a book I cannot read because I just have a problem, and I can't get beyond that problem. And the two protagonists are the male and the female who meet up in the usual romantic circumstances, and you know, this is not going to happen because she's engaged to someone else and all of this, and he's a pirate anyway, and he's just so below her, and you know, that kind of thing. But at some point, her fiance grabs off the street a slave girl who belongs to our male protagonist and has his wicked way with her. And our protagonist is understandably very upset about this. But the way he chooses to take his revenge is to kidnap the girl, our girl, the protagonist, so that her fiancé will, quote, find out what it feels like to be with somebody secondhand. And I'm sorry, I just stop. I cannot take that protagonist any further. I cannot take that protagonist's actions with any kind of, I mean, this is just, there's a line, and he crossed it. There's a line of consent and coercion. And at some point, the writer comes up with something like involving, I'm going to mangle this because I don't remember the exact quote, but something involving heart-stopping pleasure in this. I'm sorry, but there is no heart-stopping pleasure in rape.
Yeah. That's just terrible. It really is.
And that's a book I just can't get past. That is the line for me. You're not supposed to be, you know, rooting for a character who really does have that much of a lack of moral compass that he can think this is an acceptable thing to do. So yeah, you're right. The line is there. Then the coercion and consent, it's not that hard to tell the difference. It really is not if you try.
So do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways science fiction writers can break away from toxic tropes and promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
At its best, science fiction is a vision of a world that can be and that should be. Okay, you've got dystopias, and that's a whole subgenre, but at its absolute best, science fiction and fantasy is about worlds that are better in some ways. So yeah, I think that it's part of our role as sub-creators, as secondary creators of these, of these kinds of worlds. It is our duty to make it possible to believe in such things. Even if it's not possible that they can exist or will ever exist, but the possibility of belief in their existence is what lies in our hands, the people who tell the stories. And that's the gift that we have to give the world. We can we can make you think for a moment that it is possible to live in a better world.
Yeah, that's the gift of writing. Stories are one of the most powerful uh, ways of bringing about cultural change. In your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
That's exactly the crux of it. Your story cannot, no matter how strongly you feel about something, and believe me, writers feel very strongly about a lot of things. You simply have to take a step back from your story, and it cannot become a soapbox for your own ideas, which you climb on and suddenly start stuffing these ideas down people's heads. I mean, there are some very fine writers who have done exactly that. And the minute they start doing that, and trust me, people can tell. Readers are not stupid. They're going to pick up a book and they're going to realize that all of a sudden it stopped being a story and it's beginning to be a manifesto. And it's not hard to tell the difference. It really isn't, no matter how good you think you are while you're doing it.
Yeah.
So if you can manage to work your ideas, work your beliefs, work the things you're passionate about into a good story and make them lift that story into a realm of something that you're passionately proud to have conveyed to the world, that's fine. But you can't let yourself just climb on the plinth and start preaching at people about the things that you yourself believe are the absolute truth. Because people will know and people will care. And you're going to lose people like that.
So, how do you think stories that explore the theme that women can be empowered persons in their own right, and men should respect women, can help stop violence against women?
I'm sorry, can you say that one again?
Yeah. So, how do you think stories that explore the theme that women can be empowered persons in their own right, and men should respect women, can help to stop to end violence against women?
Well, like I said, the most powerful way of telling the truth is through a story.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of commentary about, men will read stories about men, but not about women, although women will read stories about men and women. Well, until we can actually get to the point where a man will pick up a story which happens to be about a woman and read it at the level of, this is a story about a human being. That's what we need to work at. The whole idea is, and people are constantly being asked, how do you write about the other gender? If you're a woman, how do you write about a man? How do you write a story that will be appealing to male readers? And the best answer to that, which I have, is from one of your, I do believe it was said by one of your other guests at this.
Yeah.
And she said, to the point, I don't write stories that appeal to just the half of the human race. It's not worth exploiting such a minor demographic. You don't write stories to appeal to a male, quote, female point of view. You write a story for a reader who is capable of picking it up and understanding that story and maybe learning something from it. I do think that there needs to be a bridge that needs to be crossed. The men need to understand that there are still things that women can teach them, even after they are out of short pants and they stop listening to their mothers. Their mother is not the only woman who is ever going to have anything to say to them. Every other woman they meet is going to have a mind. And that woman might be the mother of their own children. So if they're going to respect the right of her as a mother to teach their own sons, why cannot they take that woman and listen to her as a woman and trust her to be another human being who is capable of doing this? If they are capable of seeing her as a mother to their own children, which means that they, in some ways, respect and elevate her in their own esteem, why can they not translate that into treating her as that powerful person in her own right? Nobody's asking them to be somebody's baby all their lives. That's not what I'm saying. But the point is that if they can trust a woman to teach a child the fundamentals of what it makes to make a man, why can't the grown man believe that that woman still has something left to say to him?
That's a good point. Your stories definitely passed the Bechdel test with their depiction of complex and interesting relationships between women. Why do you think many fantasy and science fiction authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men? And what can you suggest for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically?
Well, I keep on saying the same thing, that women are people. They will talk about things that matter to them, and those things can be many and multifarious. I am often faced in what I do and what I'm in the circles that I move in. There is a particularly toxic thing that the men, or the boys, if you like, because this is very much a boys versus men thing. They will say that the girls who are in fandoms are fake geeks, fake fans, fake nerds. That they somehow or other they don't have the right to the same fandoms that the boys do. And there's the whole backlash of the whole Captain Marvel thing. I mean, there's people are squealing that there's, oh my God, there's a woman superhero. How can we possibly go and watch this movie now? But, it's a question of you have to cross that line that simply seems to be a brick wall sometimes. That a woman can actually talk about something that with you that you care about and that she knows as much about, if not more about, than you do. And there's no such thing as a fake fan. You love something. And if you love something, you know things about it. I mean, when you get a situation where a lot of people, started to turn against the new Star Wars movies because they were so female-centric in one sense. But dear God, I grew up with Princess Leia.
Yeah.
And she is, you were a spring chicken. You weren't around when the first movies were out. But I was there. Yes, but I walked into Star Wars on opening night.
Yeah.
And for me, there was a world that broke before Star Wars and after Star Wars. For me, that was a seminal thing. It was a thing on which the life broke, and all of a sudden there was a woman on the screen who had agency, who wasn't one of those Disney princesses who kept on sitting there going, "Somebody come help me." She just took over, and I loved her. I loved her so much. And when this whole new set of movies came out, and I realized that when she came out of a spaceship, and she was old, and they let her grow old with me, they let her grow up with me, and she was still my princess. And I wept.
And she died.
Yeah, well, that was a loss.
It truly was.
A big loss.
I mean, speaking of geek culture, what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
Well, there's a beginning is being made by making the occasional superhero who can do things into a woman. That's the beginning. I mean, they started out with it was a step in the right direction. It was something that, that the people suddenly realized there was a couldn't be a surprise to anybody, but somehow it was. Everybody suddenly went, "Oh, wait, what?" And now there's Captain Marvel, and there's that whole evolution of that, and I'm happy to see that it's going in that direction. But
yeah,
it's important for the girls to have something in there too.
Yeah, no, truly, it is. Because it doesn't. There's no real role model otherwise, in that culture, is there?
Yeah, it's very well to want to be Loki, but you know.
Okay, so one of the reasons violence against women exists is gender inequality. Do you think there will ever be a time when there will be complete equality between the genders?
And now we are talking fantasy, aren't we?
So
I
I'm
hope
guessing
so.
no.
I hope so. I really do. It's the ideal way that the human race is going to develop. But there are lots and lots of men out there who are more scared of us than we are of them,
Of
and
them.
because they're more scared of us, they're going to keep us down as long as they can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in America, specifically with Trump, I think that's a perfect example of him being scared of women. I like that. um, yeah. So you have been, this is the next question we're gonna ask, or I'm gonna ask. Is actually very, it's very obvious, but you've been very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Because it is an incredibly important thing, and because a lot of women may or may not find themselves in a position when it is the most important for them to do so, when it is the most incredibly dangerous for them to do anything about it. There are women who stay in abusive relationships because they literally have no other choice. They literally don't have anywhere else to go or anyone to turn to. And to me, having anything out there that is out there as a beacon for a woman who is lost, who is alone, who thinks she is alone and without any help. The work that you do is important. The work that organizations like yours do is incredibly important. Just the idea that we are not alone, that there is somebody out there looking out for us, thinking about us, trying to figure out a way to help us, even when we ourselves are not capable of doing it for ourselves.
And I mean, following from that question, what do you think authors can do? This is the final question. What do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Write the kind of stories that shine the light into the dark places that people don't want to talk about. Keep talking about it. Keep talking about it. Keep telling those stories. Keep those stories out in the front where people can't forget them, can't rub them out, can't sweep them under rugs, can't pretend that they don't exist. It exists. It's out there. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be done things with. There is an incredible amount of power in telling a story, and we should use that to help real people too.
Right. So, Alma, I think that's all of the questions we have. Thank you so much for attending our session today. Um, so I'm gonna go back to the wrap up. Yeah. So as mentioned earlier, Alma has generously donated some really lovely and exclusive treats to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors as the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. And just to go through the goodies again, the first treat is Ever After Chapbook Edition, signed and personalized for US donors only, of the 4 stories entitled Ever After. And the second treat is Alma Alexander's goodie bundle, again for US donors only, is the Midnight at Spanish Gardens paperback edition, signed and personalized. And the other 2 treats are for donors all over the world: an ebook edition, which Alma has generously made available, 2 copies of, which is available across the world, and a 30-minute one-on-one Skype chat with Alma herself. So, if any one of you are interested, please hurry up, because there are a limited number of these goodies. And once again, if someone snaps them up, it's all gone, and well, you won't have any of it. So please give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. There are also plenty more author goodies available from authors, including Joe Walton, Tananarive Due, Victoria Dahl, Caroline Kapnis, and S.A. Chakraborty, and more. New goodies will be released every week throughout March, so please give generously to help us reach it. All funds go towards the Pixel Project, work to help end violence against women. Yeah, so we have a slide as well, so you can access you can donate for goodies via the slides mentioned here. And you can find out more about Read for Pixels on http://bit.ly. And I believe Anusha will also be putting up these links for anybody who is interested on donating. And oh, okay, I've been told the slide has not been shared. All right. Yeah, I think this, yeah, sorry guys, we've had a little bit of a glitch, it seems. The slide was not shared.
I can see it, so.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you, Alma. Yeah, so that is the slide. So that's where donors can go ahead to check out our Rally Up website, and also you can find out more about Read for Pixels on our website as well. Again, like I said, I think our chat box moderator Anusha will also be putting up these links, so we can those who are interested can definitely access it through the links shared. And yeah, so
might I just add, if you want to find out more about the stuff that I've got up there, you can go to my own website, which is at www.almaalexander.org, and you can actually find out more about those books there.
Thank you, Alma. And to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. And once again, to find out more about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, please visit http://reveal.thepixelproject.net to learn more on it. And please do donate generously to help us reveal pixels and raise $1 million for the cause. So Alma, thank you so much once again for joining us. And thank you to all of the viewers. And please have a good day, good night, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Okay, so now